Now he just has to rip 3-foot pieces of foam and plug them in there and insulate the walls and seal up his rim joist because he's got ducts running through that space. He's got to make sure the ducts are sealed. So he's going to have to spend a lot of time in there with a lot of small pieces of foam. Sorry, Nicholas.
Welcome to the Fine Home Building Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Rob Wadsack, Digital Brand Manager.
Hey there.
Brian Pontalillo, Fine Home Building Editor.
Hey, everyone.
And our magic producer, Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Well, it is a pleasure to see you guys this morning.
Thanks, you too.
Happy New Year, everybody. I've just learned this show will air on New Year's Day, so Happy New Year. It's got to be better than this one.
Careful.
Yeah.
So we have a blizzard.
Yes. I've got about a foot at my house today.
I bet you don't, Brian.
No, I don't. Is it still coming down?
Yeah, it's supposed to last until late morning.
Wow.
Yep.
About 8 inches here. What'd you get, Rob?
Yeah, it looks like about a foot.
And Jeff, what'd you get?
Probably about 8 inches. I haven't been outside yet.
I did. I had to walk through it to get to the barn, and I can tell you it was deeper than my boots, which was comfy.
Yeah, and I saw that some parts of New York are getting, maybe where Matt is, are getting a couple of feet.
Yeah, Matt probably got hammered. He usually does.
Yeah.
I can't wait to talk to him about it. Kylie was super psyched for the snowfall.
Yeah, she said she was going to leave Connecticut if it didn't snow. She said Connecticut should no longer be considered part of New England if we don't get a good snowstorm.
Well, we're also this year. We're also used to being home, and like the challenge with snowstorms is not so much this being home. It's when you have to do something. It's when you have to leave the house. So this year is going to maybe people have a different relationship with these big snowstorms if they keep coming.
Well,
it's beautiful out there today. I sure appreciate the deep snow. It's great.
Yeah, don't you like to cross country ski, Patrick?
I do. I haven't much recently because you need at least 6 inches plus. And it's not often we get that here.
You haven't had that, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you go right from your house?
We ski around the yard. We have a little circuit we do on the perimeter of the property. Better skiing is up at Fairfield Hills where they have acreage of mowed grass. You need mowed grass if you don't have a deep snowpack, right? Because you hit rocks and stuff.
Yep.
Rob, is your porch done? What have you been doing over there at the homestead?
Like every other project I've ever done, I think on this house, it's about 95% complete, and I haven't it's been a couple of weeks,
so it's done.
Yeah. The only things I have left is a little bit of flashing, a couple of little pieces of trim, and the little vent for my exhaust on my range in the kitchen, and so we can feel a little bit of a draft coming in underneath the microwave. So
you obviously have a hole cut, but you don't have a damper on the other side. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a little damper built in on the microwave range hood combo. But what I'm intending to do is pull it off the wall, and they don't make like a proper connection on the back. Like if you run the thing off the top, you can attach a duct to it and fasten it to it. But on the back, there's no provision because they figure you're just going to shove it against the wall. And what do they expect it to leak into the wall if you don't tape it properly? There's no way. There's no way in the instructions.
You just vent it right into the stud cavity up to the attic.
And of course that's not going to happen because that I tape the heck out of that every single penetration on that wall when I was working on it. So what I'm planning on doing is I've got this neoprene foam gasket material that's used for weather stripping windows or something. And I'm going to put that around the opening when I put the thing back against the wall. And I'm going to tape the new vent to the actual opening from the inside of the house. So we'll see what happens.
Your microwave might have come with a flange that goes on the back of there, but that's probably
No,
long
no.
gone, right?
This is a brand new unit, and I looked in the instructions. I looked online. I looked on YouTube videos of people installing these things. I could not find a single. I should probably just call them and see what they say. But I couldn't find a single.
God forbid you ask the manufacturer.
There were no instructions to be found anywhere for venting it directly through the wall and having a good connection.
What have you been doing, Brian? Did you work on your desk like we talked about last week?
I did not. The last weekend, the weather was just too nice. For mid-December to have days that were in the mid-70s, I thought I'm just going to enjoy this weather. So, and that there's some irony in that because I live in an apartment, so I need to build my desk outside. So it would have been the nice weather to do that, but I'm not afraid of a little cold, and so I'll build the desk on a colder day, which we're having now. And so I'm glad I enjoyed those nice days outside because now we're having some cold, wet weather. So so maybe this weekend I'll get out there and do it. Yeah.
Jeff, what have you been doing?
Not much.
That's cool.
I've been busy, but I can't remember what.
Yeah. You've been like editing podcasts is what you've been doing.
Yeah, well,
probably
always.
deep into the night. I've been working on the kitchen. We put the island, or it's not an island, it's a work surface countertop above the washer and dryer. Finished it with some mineral oil, sanded it to 220. I really love my 6-inch Bosch sander, Rob.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it gives the Festool Rotex a run for the money, and it's $200 instead of $600.
Yeah, there's always some features on some of those unique Festool tools that nobody else seems to have. Like the Festool has that vacuum port, that exhaust port in the middle of the discs, and I find that it clears the paper and keeps it cooler, so you don't gum up when you're sanding through paint and stuff like that. But I don't know if it's worth double the price.
Well, it's interesting.
Go ahead,
it's interesting that you noticed that, Rob, because I remember this is many years ago, but I remember at one point the folks from Festool had come to visit us at our offices in Connecticut, and they were sort of, they weren't as well known as they are now, didn't have as many tools in their line, and we asked them about new tool development, and one of what we were told was we look at the tool categories and we feel we'll develop a tool for that category if we feel we can find 3 ways to improve on what we think is the best tool in the category. So that was sort of their bar to develop a new tool and enter a tool category. I don't know if they still use that ethos in their tool development or not, but I agree with you. They do tend to have. I've used some of their tools that I like, and actually I've used some that I don't like, and I don't know why, because other people like their Jigsaw, for example.
The Jigsaw is not good.
People love it, and I didn't like using it at all. I used it a couple winters ago, working on a cabinetry project where we did a ton of scribing, and there was a lot of use for a Jigsaw in that job, and the fellow who I was working with had one, and I ended up bringing my own to the job because I just didn't like using it.
Interesting.
You got to wonder if some of that is that like people buy that one Festool tool that just works amazing, and it's one of those brands that just has a really strong brand following. I mean, I know most big tool brands have a brand following, but there's there's huge forums about people who own Festool tools, and maybe they get hooked on the one that they love, and then they just kind of go along with everything else.
I think there's some truth to that, and I think perception. I know people will argue with me on this all day long, but I chuckle how the people frown so much on biscuit joinery nowadays, but they love the domino tool. And maybe sure, it's a better tool and makes a stronger joint, but I still ask the question, like, most of the joints that we use biscuits for, how strong do they need to be?
Right.
We're trying to line the joint and make it a little bit stronger, but in home building, most of the stuff that we're using biscuits for, it's going to be nailed to a wall.
Yeah. It's more for convenience to align things. I don't know.
Yeah,
and you can do real narrow things, which is certainly appealing. Unlike a biscuit, right? The skinniest biscuit is still like 1.5 inches, right, or an inch. and you can get tiny dominoes.
Yeah.
It's a cool, awesome tool. It's very expensive.
It's very expensive. Yeah. It's interesting to see more and more woodworkers using it.
Oh gosh, it's if you're making doors and furniture with plywood and stuff, it's a no-brainer. It's so fast and the joints are super strong.
Yeah.
Speaking of unique tools, we heard from Mike, and his subject line in his email was "Tool for Patrick to review. I know your love of two-cycle engines and cordless tools. Enjoy." So, Rob, did you have a look at Mike's picture here?
Yeah, I mean, what brand would you call that? It's like a hybrid. It's a hybrid brand. It's like a steel weed whacker attached to a DeWalt chop saw?
It's a steel wall. What did you think of this, Jeff?
It was definitely different.
It looked like it was put together pretty well. I mean, it looked like it almost.
It's fantastic. The engineering is fantastic. So I've heard that the folks in Amish country, the Amish, make their own tools in this manner often. And I mean, not, variants of not using electricity to power their power tools, like cabinet saws and woodworking machinery. They use hydraulics and hydraulic
Can I ask you something, Patrick?
power plants.
Patrick,
What's that?
what is it that creates the spark in a gasoline-powered engine? Isn't it electricity?
I'm not Amish, so I shouldn't be speaking with authority on this subject, but I've heard of this, and there are some very big woodworking operations run by the Amish.
Yeah.
And I've talked to them at trade shows, and it's pretty interesting. They've shown me pictures of the stuff they have, and they make their power on site.
Yeah.
I think this might be something like that, but I don't know for sure. It looks amazing. Do you think we adequately described it to our listeners?
Well, I mean, basically what happened is someone took where the motor goes and they inserted the end of the shaft of the weed whacker motor in, and I imagine there's a pulley in there or something.
Yeah, I think this is a belt-driven saw, so I think they just put a pulley on the end of this weed whacker shaft, and it's now powering the saw. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Is it? And,
This comes
and
from Pete.
it's the if I'm getting this right, it's also the weed whacker handle.
Yeah, they just kind of strap the the throttle onto where the handle of the saw.
Yeah,
That's the trigger.
Yep.
I love this.
Well, there'll be a picture of that on the podcast notes page if anyone wants to see what it looks like.
Now I know what to do with my backpack blower I don't want to carry around. This comes from Pete. Patrick, heard your comment about that you are not as cold-hardy as you used to be. Sad news, it feels cold as the temperature drops below your age. I know, I'm 63. What do you think about Pete's metric? It gets cold if you're, if you're below your age.
I never heard about that, but that actually kind of seems to jive.
So the delta T between the temperature and your age that's a direct relationship to how you experience the cold.
Yeah, you get uncomfortable if it's below your age.
Well, I mean, I know that my neighbor, who's like 10 years older than me, complains a lot more about the temperature than I do. So
I can buy that.
We have very smart listeners. Right? Hi, Rob. You weren't too far off when you joked about running the zip tape over the white vinyl window frame. I've done a window like yours and needed it to be dark green to match the client's storm door. While there are painting products and protocols that will stick to the vinyl, I bought the window at my local. I brought the window to my local truck vinyl wrap shop, and he wrapped the frame with matte finish dark green scrap for $30. It looks like the Pella factory color and will last much longer than any paint. Best wishes, Ken. Is that awesome or what?
Yeah, I was right on board with that one. I mean, because I feel like those vinyl wraps are just a nice alternative to paint in a lot of situations, and I might even be willing to tackle. I told him I'd be willing to tackle that job myself because I've applied some vinyl over the years when I did those trade show booths.
Well, it would be way easier than a car, right? Which is huge. A window is way smaller. You get a heat gun and go to town. What do you think, Brian?
I'd like to see it.
What do you think, Jeff?
I think it's a cool idea.
I didn't take it that seriously, like I was actually going to do it, but now, I think I might actually, because I told you I screwed up the paint job on that window, and it'd be a lot easier to just wrap it with vinyl.
Right over the peeling paint.
Well, maybe I'll scrape it a little bit. But if I screw it up, I peel it off and try again. That's no big deal, right?
What the interesting thing about this to me is the wide variety of colors and finishes and weird stuff that you can get these wraps in. Like you can get like mirror metallic wraps, and you could do super cool stuff with your windows with this.
Maybe
maybe it doesn't last decades, but
yeah.
How long does one of these truck wraps last?
The thing is, the peel and stick wallpaper, I think, is really kind of hot in the rental market right now. This is kind of an extension of that. It's really the same stuff. It's a vinyl peel removable wallpaper. So maybe we need to just expand the market to other parts of the house.
What are you talking about? What?
We featured it in the magazine. Yeah, it's basically vinyl wallpaper that is just like those car wrap vinyl. So it's not an aggressive adhesive, and you can remove it without damaging the wall, supposedly, when it's done.
I should probably read our magazine.
Which should be true of any wallpaper applied well.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you're a renter, though, you can't be like putting sizing on the wall, right? I mean,
right.
Yeah. So it's I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. But I'm gonna have to just get a whole bunch of that car vinyl and just try it on surfaces all over my house. Maybe my
check
new
in
roof
with
will
Michelle
be
in a few weeks.
Yeah, my metal roof's looking a little shabby on the barn. Maybe I'll do a vinyl wrap of that.
Oh, that's fantastic. Hey, FHB podcast people, your podcast is one of my favorites, and I've been listening to it since the beginning. I'm also a print subscriber, and I've been reading Taunton Magazine since the 80s. I have some comments about a recent topic. I was a programmer analyst for a large Wall Street firm, and after about 15 years, I was laid off in 2001. After that, I started working with friends, painting and performing renovation carpentry. In the intervening years, I've done plumbing and bath renos, store fixtures, laminate countertop fabrication, furniture and millwork repair, deck building, and many others. I've had more jobs than I can count, but that's a discussion for another day. I'm writing to you today to comment about ladder safety. I've had a few close calls. Nothing adds spark to the day like having a ladder slide down the face of a wall while you're high up on it. However, one day my luck ran out. I was hired to clean out a house that the owner was selling. It was 3 days before Christmas, and I was removing stuff from a big platform/shelf the owner had built in the top of the ceiling joist in his garage. Ladder safety tip number 1, don't be lazy. I was using a little giant type ladder and only extended it to rest on the joist that was at the front of the platform. I didn't extend it past the top edge like I should have. I was tossing stuff over my shoulder onto a pile to go into the dumpster. When I tossed a box of ice skates over my shoulder, it was like a cartoon. The box hit a piece of lumber that was sticking out like a diving board, and it launched the skates back toward me in a perfect arc to strike the base of the ladder. This caused the ladder to kick out from under me, and I fell straight down about 5 feet, landing on my foot. I lay on the cold floor waiting for the pain to subside, which it didn't. I was alone in the house, so I needed to call for help. Tip number 2, if you're working alone, always have your phone nearby. I thought my phone was in my jacket pocket, so in considerable pain, I crawled through the house, used the stairs and railing to reach my jacket, and found my phone was in my truck. Somehow I got to the truck and called for an ambulance. Long story short, I fractured a vertebrae and spent several months recovering. It was a very painful lesson. Ken, that is a thought-provoking story, Ken. Thank you very much for sharing it.
I've seen a major shift in the past, not only a bunch of years in the magazine and our audience, and obviously we've always tried to present what we think is the safest way to do a job, but there seems to be a lot more awareness about that nowadays. I mean, obviously people call us out when they see people not wearing protective gear, and certainly when they're high up without protection, and it's so easy to just grab that ladder if you got a small project to do and be lazy about it. But, several months.
Yeah. And this is, and really the things that make setting up a ladder a lot safer than are small things like this, like making sure the ladder extends, adequately past what it's bearing on, and getting an appropriate angle for the ladder. If there's any question, bracing the feet. If you're outside, you can use some stakes. If you're inside, you can, screw down a temporary blocking to the floor. I was really impressed. I photographed an article a few years ago on rooftop solar panel installations, and I was really impressed with the safety techniques that this crew used to set up their ladder. Unlike a painter, right, a roofer or someone installing solar panels can set up the ladder in one place and leave it there for the day or for the duration of the job, and use it to get materials up and down. And they just had one of the first things they did was, they had two people work on setting up that ladder safely, tying it off to the house, bracing the feet, and then immediately send someone up onto the ridge to put the first anchor in for their fall protection. It was just a nice system that, it took the first 15 minutes of the morning, and then they could be safe from there on. They could, sort of ensure safety as people traveled up and down that ladder all day long.
I think it's interesting you bring up, photovoltaic installers, because unlike a lot of businesses now, they get paid by their installation. It's piecework. And so when people challenge safety and say, well, I don't have time to do that, or I don't have the resources to spend doing that. Well, these folks do, and they see the value in spending that time to, as Brian says, work safely the rest of the day and not get hurt. How much time is it going to waste if you have to treat someone, or if they have to get stitches, small injuries like that?
Right.
Forget falling off a roof.
Much more time and much bigger money.
Oh, the stakes are really high.
Yeah. What was also fascinating about watching them work was how they used their fall protection. Of course it's there as fall protection, but they used it as a tool. They were
for positioning,
basically leveraging it as a way to hold themselves on the roof while they, used both hands, to do other things.
If you're on steep slopes and you're doing stuff, you have to have positioning equipment too,
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
I can say, that the second tip about if you're working alone, always have your phone nearby. I don't know why, but why it's such a strong feeling for me. But if I'm doing something up on a ladder or with heavy lifting or anything like that, I always am thinking in the back of my head, if my wife isn't home or nearby, that I definitely need to keep the phone right in my pocket. And I think that's definitely a good point. Who does, it's a rare person that's on a job site that doesn't have a phone these days. So it's
maybe the best safety tool you've got if you're working alone.
Yeah, I actually accidentally almost made an emergency call the other day because I was trying to put the volume up on my iPhone, and if you press the home button 3 times, it goes into emergency mode, and gives you an opportunity to cancel it. But so even if you can't speak, there's a way to make a call.
Ken, it's a great letter. It's it's a food for thought for all of us, right? I think part of this, Ken's letter was in response to maybe a comment I made to Kylie when she said in a previous episode, I really need to get over my fear of ladders. Yeah. And I made the comment, you just need to do it. But with the caveat that you also have to have safe setups, and, you have to be able to trust your equipment and not get hurt.
Yeah, and this timing is actually interesting because I got an email from Andy Egel this morning about an idea for some videos that he thought could be helpful for our audience about lifting heavy things. And that's not only are we often off the ground in the building trades, but we're often off the ground doing compromising work. Moving heavy stuff you can get injured when you're standing with 2 feet on solid ground.
Yep.
We're often doing on ladders and scaffolding, and so it's it can be exponentially dangerous when you add not just using the ladder or the scaffolding or being on a roof, but then the work that we're engaging in.
And then throw in the uneven ground and bad weather that you're also dealing with, right?
Right.
I don't know if we've done a feature article on that. We've had tons and tons of tips over the years of, material handling on job sites, getting things onto roofs, whatever. But I can tell you that, I certainly don't have the strength that I used to when I was in my 20s, and I was moving some Advantech into my basement with low ceilings the other day. And it's like, normally you kind of hoist it up so you're at a position where you can hold it under your arm. And I just didn't have the space to do that. And it's like, I would love to revisit that concept, or sort of a compile of tips on that, and maybe even solicit some more tips if people out there have ideas for crafty ways to get materials safely to compromising places. That would be awesome for them.
Yeah.
Our first question comes from Jared in Le Sueur, Minnesota. Forgive me, Jared, if I pronounce your town's name incorrectly. Dear podcast team, I'm an industrial technology teacher in Minnesota. One of my courses is an Intro to the Trades class. One of the units of this class is on framing, and I've run into a very uncomfortable situation regarding framing member terminology. Even though I don't like it, I'm willing to deal with king studs and jack studs, even though there are no queen studs, and even if there would no doubt be somehow lesser than king studs. I can explain to my female students that historically this is because it was done by men, and therefore they use male terminology. However, I have a very hard time using the term cripple studs given the inherent degrading nature of the term. Usually when I've had students in my class especially when I've had students in my class who use wheelchairs. Before making any suggestions, I want to make sure there is not another explanation for using that term other than what I'm assuming it represents. If there is, I would love to know so I can share it with my students. If not, what are your thoughts? Do you agree that you could probably come up with a better term for this? Any suggestions for replacement names? What does the process of getting the word out look like so that people in the industry, if they're willing, will make the change? There will always be people that never change, but if we could get enough people familiar with a new term, it could perhaps catch on. Love the work you do. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Also, I look forward to getting a sticker. I'm going to address the sticker. The sticker program has been kind of an embargo lately. I've not been sending out stickers. So if you all have not gotten a sticker and I've read your question or your comments on the over the podcast, please let me know in an email to the podcast mailbox and I will get those out. But sorry. Anyway, Jared asks a very good question. What do you guys think of this?
Well, I did a little bit of research on it, and I couldn't find any alternative terminology. It seems like it's been around for a really long time, and I think he's correct in that it's basically, I mean, you think about it as a limb that's been shortened or severed. So that's the best guess at where the term does come from.
Brian, you have any thoughts on this?
I like Rob. I mean, I didn't have a ton of time to look into this, but I looked for sort of some, did some searches for the history of these terms, and I didn't. All I ended up getting lots of resources about what the terms mean in our current construction, lexicon.
Right.
So I'm on board. If we can come up with some, new terminology for this.
I got the perfect one. Got the perfect one. Pony studs. It's a smaller version of a horse. We have pony walls, right, which are shortened stud walls. What do you think? Pony studs. Who doesn't like ponies?
I like it. This would be an interesting social experiment to see if we can use the power of social media to change a term like this that's so ingrained in our industry.
So I think we have a listener expert. Is it entomology or is that the study of insects?
It's etymology.
Etymology.
Drop the N. Yeah.
Sorry, everyone. Deja Leger is our expert in word origins. So, Deja, if you have any thoughts on this, I'd love to hear it. And we'll try and make this catch on. Or what do you guys think?
I mean, it's worth a shot, right? But yeah, I can certainly understand his concern there, but I looked and couldn't find any alternatives that are readily accessible. So
yeah, and we've got trimmers as opposed to jacks, but we don't have we got to change king studs too. He also made the point that we don't have in his letter that we don't have a queen stud, and which should probably be, I think we all know should probably be a more important part of the house than a king stud. Let's be real.
What do you think that should be? What would be a queen stud in light framing?
I don't know.
Maybe the main entry door uses queen studs instead of king studs or something like that. Yeah.
I think it's got to be something like, foundational, right?
Yeah,
It's gotta
I think
be like,
whatever the most important thing in any
Yeah.
given house is, that holds the house up.
It's a good point, Jared. Words are important, and words change, right? We don't use the same words we did even 50 years ago for many things.
Yeah, I actually heard a really interesting story recently about how they were trying to come up with a signage for where they were burying nuclear waste and they wanted the signage to be legible or understandable to someone 10,000 years into the future. And they found it extremely difficult to even find like language, terminology, imagery that would last even a couple hundred years based on how fast our languages change.
So this is from Mike. Hello, FHB podcast gang. I just recently got into podcasts and really enjoying listening to the FHB episodes. I'm writing from Ontario, Canada. My house is a small bungalow built in 1959. I renovated the main floor and found many things you'd typically expect, including 9x9 asbestos tile. What I didn't expect to find was pink fiberglass insulation, not paper-backed, in the walls. Most homes I've worked on of this vintage did not have any insulation at all. There was a builder in town who would pull the insulation out of the house once the inspection passed and use that to insulate the next house. That's hilarious.
Okay.
My biggest surprise was to find foil-faced rigid foam sheathing. While I'm not certain of when that practice came into play, I understand it to have been much later than when my house was built. Through a small job from work, I found the same product on a house of similar age. My question for the podcast gang would be, how and why do you think this insulation got there? My theory is that the house was insulated with urea formaldehyde foam insulation and later had it removed, and at the time of doing so, that was when the insulation and ISO board were applied. I should also note that there isn't any plastic vapor barrier, just the space blanket strips on the edge of the studs. Like in a few electrical boxes, as well as in the floor joists, I found small bits of the spray foam that behaved just like my boss explained UFFI to me. There are several houses in my neighborhood that were insulated with this material, and still have it, so I don't think it's such a stretch that my house had it too. I hope to hear everyone's take on this. Thanks for all the trade tips, promotion of the trades, and of course, keeping craft alive. Sincerely yours, Mike. So, Brian, do you want to explain what this urea formaldehyde foam insulation is first, please?
Well, I don't know too much about it other than that it was a spray foam like product that was used, I think, mostly in the 70s and early 80s.
Yeah, that's right.
And it, I believe it had longevity issues.
It sucked.
It pulled away from framing and eventually I think just kind of crumbled, right?
Yeah.
So it didn't last.
What do you know about it, Rob?
I mean, I always assumed that the issues with it were health issues because of the ingredients, the formaldehyde in it, but maybe not. But I do know that I've found some in houses before, and it's got the same consistency as that crumbly florist's foam, those green blocks they stick the flowers in. Yep. And so, yeah, you can understand why it's this rigid, very delicate stuff that is not very compatible with the movement of houses.
Right.
So I was helping Matt Kenny put a new double hung window in his stairway landing, and he had this in his old house, and it's horrible, and it's even more fragile than that foam, Rob. But I would say that is a good explanation for folks to imagine it, but. It's horrible. And the other problem is, you both suggest, is the outgassing of the formaldehyde as it, chemically reacted. And so it didn't last long because it was just absolutely terrible stuff. So,
yeah, and that's one of the, I mean, that's it's worth noting that that's one of the most problematic chemicals in building materials.
And it's in a lot of building materials.
Yeah. And I think that EPA has done a good job of limiting it, but it's still in, quite a bit of engineered lumber and if you can buy like cabinetry, cheap cabinetry made with panel products with a lot of formaldehyde glues in them. So it's certainly something to be aware of if you're looking for healthy indoor air quality.
It's what an eye and lung irritant, right? Isn't that the problem with it, Brian?
Eye and lung irritant, and in the immediate and known carcinogen for long-term exposure.
Okay. Boy, we are having a really happy show today, right?
Well, I don't know what the foil-faced rigid foam particular product that he found on his house, but radiant barriers in early foil-faced foam was marketed as radiant barrier technology. Radiant barriers were used long before his house was built, and were in fashion in building, I believe, early, like in the 50s and whatnot, and started to see foil-faced insulations, foil-faced panel products, bubble wrap, the foil bubble wrap, all those things. But I believe they were kind of outmarketed by the mass insulation, manufacturers.
Have you heard of this assembly where they put strips on the studs? That was a first for me.
That
I've never heard.
That I'm not familiar with at all. In fact, I don't know what he's talking about.
Well, one thing I was curious about with that is, like, when I pulled off insulation in my kitchen wall, it was obviously, it had been insulated more than once, and the previous insulation job, they had done a plastic vapor barrier, and then they had cut that back when they put the second batch of insulation in there. So, I mean, without more information, maybe he's even talking about something that's actually a remnant from a previous insulation job.
That's quite possible, Rob.
From a building science perspective, if whoever was doing this retrofitting, if it wasn't accidental, if they put foil-faced foam on the outside, they would be wise to remove any plastic on the inside. So
you'd have a drying direction.
So maybe it was accidental, but maybe they knew that. Maybe they knew what they were doing.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like, this is an archaeology question, basically. It's like without a whole lot of digging around, poking around in the walls and a little more information and some photos, it's kind of hard to take a guess at what happened in the past, half century in this house.
Yeah, more importantly is what you do with it going forward. What you decide to keep and what you decide to remove.
I love the tale of the builder who used the insulation over and over again. That's hilarious. Hi all, I'm a longtime DIYer and recently licensed residential builder. My education and career is in engineering and product development, so I love hearing you guys discuss unmet needs so I can add those ideas to my product development funnel. Keep them coming. We recently purchased a 1963 brick ranch and are in the process of renovating nearly every space. The house is beautiful with good bones, but was a 1970s time capsule inside. I'm surely going to be reaching out again in the future as new challenges pop up. For now, I'll start with hopefully an easy one. There are conditioned crawl spaces under the ends of the T shape of the floor plan. They are clean, dry, and have concrete poured in there on the floor. Overall, they're pretty nice, and unfortunately pretty big, 800 square feet total. However, they are cold enough that you can feel the difference in floor temperature on the main floor when walking from a basement section to a crawl space section. My challenge is, how the heck should I insulate these spaces? Specifically, how am I supposed to get all of those foam boards in there, the roughly 3-foot diagonal openings? I can't just get behind ripping foam panels and lugging them in there. Should I do the floors and walls or just the walls? Because it's pretty dry, should I cut corners and throw bats under the main floor? Or should I just resort to wearing slippers and ignore my inner engineer? Side note, the rooms with ducts running through these spaces blow not hot air into the bedrooms, and it's only December. Any help would be appreciated. See attached images. So, I'm sorry, who is this gentleman? If you guys can see the pictures, it'll have his name on them.
Nicholas.
Nicholas's crawl spaces look really tidy
Yeah.
and dry, which
Yeah.
is great. So that's a perfect thing.
Now he just has to rip 3-foot pieces of foam and plug them in there and insulate the walls and seal up his rim joist because he's got ducts running through that space. He's got to make sure the ducts are sealed. So he's going to have to spend a lot of time in there with a lot of small pieces of foam. Sorry, Nicholas.
Well, so at first
I love when there's a simple answer, right, Brian?
Right.
yeah, I mean, you confirmed exactly what he was thinking. At first, I was going to say, I was looking at the pictures, I was looking for ducts, and I was like, well, maybe if the ducts are all up in the joists, he could insulate the floor and put rigid foam underneath the floor system, but that's not the case.
No, he's got to insulate the walls
Yeah.
because even if you insulate the floor, it's going to still be cold, right? Isn't that a weird property of insulating an unconditioned crawl space floor? Is if you insulate it, it doesn't help much.
Oh yeah, no, I meant if his ducts were completely above the floor framing, he could have done his insulation at the floor if he sealed it upright. But yeah, like you said, rigid foam is going everywhere in that place. And
Yeah, I mean, probably air sealing and insulating the rim joist is going to go a long way. But if you're going to get in there and work to that length, insulate the walls too.
so he could.
Here we go. Here's the plus though is 2-inch XPS and comes in 2x8 sheets, right? So it's going to be easy to get it through this hole and put on the walls. And we don't like people to use XPS, but we also don't want them to have cold floors.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, some of the foam boards come with a snap joint in them, even if you get the 4x8 sheets for breaking them up. And if he's going to do EPS, so you get like a thin kerf saw, or you get if you get a really good one of those long snap-off blade utility knives, and a good metal straight edge, it's a lot cleaner and faster than trying to rip them on a table saw.
Yeah,
Totally agreed.
I agree. And get one of those 4-foot T-squares, and they make it really easy to cut straight and square.
Yeah, I mean, if he's really going to if this as big as this job is, he might even want to just set up a table with one of those hot wire cutters and just make a table out of plywood and sawhorses and put a fence on one side and just run it through it.
Jeff is nodding like he knows about cutting with a hot wire.
Yeah, I mean that's how the manufacturers do it. So,
Have you done this before?
a little bit, yeah. I just not extensively.
Interesting. To make what?
Lettering, actually.
Like big foam letters?
Yeah.
Like
Interesting.
props for something or other.
Uh-huh.
Oh, that's cool. I've
Jeff should be hosting the show, honestly.
Yeah, I know. Why didn't you answer that question, Jeff? But yeah, and like you guys were, Brian, you were saying, I think it's like there's an order of events here that you're going to have make some big impacts without doing the full insulation job. I mean, you start by air sealing and duct sealing, and then you move to insulating the walls. And if you're going to do insulating the walls, maybe you can get like a creeper. I don't know how high the ceiling is in there, but get some kind of a dolly or a creeper so you can kind of roll around in there to make your life so you're not crawling around on your hands and knees.
At a minimum, and I've said this on the show before, is get big pieces of cardboard to slide yourself on, because it's much easier on your body than dragging yourself on concrete.
For sure. And that's
Both,
kind of a rough looking slab too.
Both Fine Home Building, you can find great articles on how to do this, both on Fine Home Building and on GBA. And there is a requirement for a conditioned crawl space. There are ventilation requirements that you'll want to look into, because they're not just code requirements, but they matter. And that's either allowing that conditioned crawl space to interface with the home above, the HVAC system in the floors above, or having an exhaust fan out of the space that just is continually
Ventilating
it.
Yeah, I remember, I don't know what the number is. I feel like it's got a 30-inch square opening or something like that when you're doing a crawl space. He's got little vents in that little door that he gets into it with. I can see from the photos, but they're going to need to be bigger than that. But once the place is insulated and air sealed, it's not going to be as much of a concern to have that air communicating with the rest of the house.
You're lucky to have such tidy dry crawl spaces. My
Yeah, that's a
parting
nice
words.
looking crawl space.
Oh my God. I dream about having a concrete basement.
Dear Fine Sawhorse Building Podcast, thanks so much for the compilation of articles that came out today about sawhorses. I was just about to buy a new set of plastic ones, but I think I'll do something nice out of wood instead. You've given us lots of options, and I appreciate the reorganization of web resources that is currently underway. I'm writing about my Western New Hampshire house, pictured below, which is just about done. We completed the brown stain just before the temperature dropped, and we just need to do a porch cable railing to complete the exterior. My question this time around is about the foundation, which you can see in the attached pictures. I know I need both aesthetic advice and technique, so I'd really like to hear from Kylie, as well as you guys. You can see in the photos that the addition has a plain poured concrete foundation wall above grade. It is properly insulated below grade. The original house, however, dates to 1999, and I think it was poured into rigid foam panels and then a scratch coat of cement applied to hide the insulation above grade. My painter says I should get rid of the foam because it will make a home for insects, but I did not see any evidence of this in the past summer. This would be fine with me, but it may be that the cement is grooved like the foam we can see. I'd also like to make the two parts of the house look more unified, so I'm considering this idea. His idea. Other ideas would be to apply some horizontal PT 1x4 or 1x6 as a way to create some architectural interest, but this seems to be a waste of wood and one more thing to maintain. And I wonder what that will look like against the vertical board and batten above. My wife is suggesting some applied stone veneer or a product like Evolve Stone, but the house is rural and rustic, and I want to keep some simplicity to the design. Should I just apply cement board to the old section? If so, how to attach it? Can you take a look at the pictures and let me know what everyone thinks? Many thanks, Ken. So we learned just before the show, because Rob is astute and I am not, Ken actually had some feedback earlier in the show.
Yeah, he's the guy with
right, Rob?
I'm pretty sure it's the same Ken with the vinyl wrap, yeah. Yep.
Good for you, Ken. You're not getting 2 stickers, though, buddy.
So you guys recognize what that stuff is?
This is a common problem, right? This is a common problem to hide concrete foundations and insulate them, right, Brian?
To hide concrete foundations? No, to insulate them, yes. Absolutely. And more as people are, running continuous insulation up their walls and wanted to extend, connect to the below grade insulation, and they're looking for ways, or if they're building some sort of a shallow frost protected foundation and they have to have, that you have to have foam around the perimeter. So lots of people are facing this problem now of what to do with protecting and dressing up insulation, exposed insulation on foundations.
You were going to say something, Rob, before I interrupted you. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, judging from the picture, it kind of looks like that's an ICF foundation, right? And not one that's which is kind of what he was describing. He said it was foam that concrete was poured into, but I don't know if he was aware that it's integral to the foundation. If that's the case, it's not just a applied foam insulation. So it's not something I would recommend removing in that case.
I think I would redo the parge coat and have it match the other foundation that doesn't have the foam on it.
That's the simplest choice.
That's the simplest choice. Yeah, I mean, I do think stone veneer could look great on this house, and that can be applied to both. It could be applied to both foundation materials, right? It can be applied to the concrete on one part of the house and the foam on the other part of the house. So you could go that route, and it would probably look really nice, and you can make that look rustic.
Totally. And ignore your painter. Do not remove this.
No, do not remove it.
Remove this.
If anybody was concerned about insects, I mean, the one thing to do would be to inspect the top edge of that foam and see if there's any metal flashing there, because that's usually the typical detail, is to put a piece of metal flashing between the foam and the wood to as a barrier to insects. And if that isn't there and there's a concern for that, you could certainly make a slit in there and insert some flashing in there before you do your parge coat or whatever else you're going to do.
I think they're like synthetic cement materials that are made just for this purpose. And my understanding is they're a little more forgiving for, the person who's not a professional mason or, EIFS installer or whatever, and One that jumps to mind is called Styrobond, and I think it's an acrylic material, and you put this on right on the styrofoam, and it makes it look kind of like stucco. I've seen people bend coil stock, painted steel coil like one would make metal roofing from standing seam metal roofing, and I've seen that bent like kind of go over the foam insulation, and I think that looks fine on the right house, but it's not rustic at all, so I don't think that's the right choice for this structure.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd be a big fan of metal that close to the ground too. I mean, even aluminum over time is going to possibly corrode where it contacts the ground. But yeah, you're right. There are a bunch of products. I mean, I didn't have a whole lot of time to sort of come up with some brand names, but I'll certainly put those in the show notes. And I think it was Martin Holliday wrote an article about protecting exterior foundation insulation. Oh, no, actually it was Scott Gibson a bunch of years ago. And it's kind of an older article. So I think the options have actually grown since then. We should probably even get that article updated. But you're right. There are some panels that are like cement board panels or plastic panels that look like masonry materials that go over there.
But in our next issue, we have a story on a raft slab, how to build and install a raft slab, and they had.
Can you, Brian? Sorry to interrupt you. Can you tell folks what that is? Because that's going to be a new term for a lot of people.
Well, to make it as simple as possible, think kind of literally creating a raft, like structure from EPS rigid foam, and then pouring your slab foundation inside. And
it's kind of like tub shaped, right? You're like
like a tub, like a tub.
Yeah.
And then because the foundation, the slab foundation is so well insulated, it doesn't need to, and insulated in particular ways, it doesn't need to extend below the frost line like it would in a location like where this place was in upstate New York, where footings would have to be 4 feet or more deep.
But any of these, they have big expanses of EPS exposed, right? That's the problem.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Is you have to deal with this same issue. You have this perimeter exposed EPS foam, and this builder attaches some concrete backerboard, and then does a stucco coat over that, and that can extend below grade, so you can backfill your grade up against it to the height that you'd like, and it looks nice above grade.
What protects the tile backer from freeze thaw? Like, because that stuff can get wet. Is there a waterproofing layer on the cement board?
I don't believe there was in this case.
Because I was at the Fine Home Building house yesterday, and where they did applied stone veneer, they had a similar cement type board product and then a waterproofing layer on top of that.
What was the waterproofing layer?
What was it?
Yeah.
I honestly don't remember what.
It was some sort of liquid applied. I think it was Ardex was the brand, liquid applied WRB. I don't know if it's designed to be a WRB, but it's the same type of material. But I was thinking that was more for the fact that there's a masonry, it's a mass wall over the wood framing. I don't know if that was in as much for frost protection. I don't know.
We should learn more about what we're talking about sometimes.
But yeah, I don't know. The cement board sounds like if there's not a frost issue with it, sounds like a great idea. Because I mean, you figure you put it on before you dig down a little bit, and then the backfilling against it is going to help hold it on anyway. But what do they use, an adhesive or screws to fasten that on, Brian? Do you know?
Well, I believe they use both.
Yeah.
And there's not much to fasten into when you have 12-inch thick EPS foam.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the screws were probably temporary to hold it in place, while some sort of mastic or adhesive set up.
Yeah.
I think that raft slab generally is a very interesting thing. I like the fact that you don't need to have your excavator do the insulating like you do in a frost protected shallow foundation. I like that it's kind of unitized and helps contain the concrete by its very nature. It's pretty cool.
Right. Yep.
Is that expensive, Brian? Was that discussed?
It seems like a smart way to go. It wasn't discussed because for this builder it was a necessity. Like this solved a bunch of issues for them. it would be interesting to look into costs, of excavation versus. So your costs are going to be excavation versus all this EPS foam. You have less concrete, so you minimize some costs there. And it's I'd say it's fairly labor intensive compared to
Placing all the blocks, you mean the foam blocks?
yeah.
And
setting you have a lot of similar work to do. You still have to have gravel base. You still have to have perimeter drainage. So you do
reinforcement.
You do have a lot of similar work to do. Steel in the thickened edge.
It's a perennial problem. I'm going to ask our listeners, like I always do, for their help with solving this, hiding foam insulation in above ground applications. And what do you guys do? I would love to know about it, because it's something I've been hearing people talk about for 20 years now.
Well, a lot of people with new builds, the answer you're going to get is don't put the insulation outside the wall.
But it's better out there. Come on, don't you agree?
Well, I think it is, and I think that Joe Stiebert's perfect wall is idea of having all your insulation outside of your building structure is meant to apply to all buildings, right? It's not just the walls; it's the walls, the roof, it's the slab. He claims that it's always worth doing, but I think the advantages are marginal when you're talking about concrete.
Because concrete's durable. Concrete doesn't care if it gets wet.
It doesn't care if it gets wet. It doesn't care if it gets, if it's poured right, and if your footings are at the right depth. It doesn't matter if it freezes and thaws. It's.
But then you have to cover it on the inside. I mean, there, as I understand it, one or two types of polyiso with foil facers on them that you can install uncovered, but if you have a basement or a crawl space of any depth, you have to protect the foam insulation from fire. It seems like a complexity versus putting it on the outside.
But if you're building a basement that's that nice and that insulated, you might as well consider it at least semi-finished space and throw some drywall over it. I would imagine, if you're talking about new builds.
Yeah, and some certain builders are who are pouring, working on slabs are, they're insulating the slab and the slab edges and protecting it from the stem wall, and then but finding ways to make that insulation continuous into the walls, whether it's that they have a double stud wall or however they're making that work, and so they're avoiding having to have it on the outside of the house. So there's lots of ways.
Yeah, there's so always ways, right?
But you did make a good point that this is one of these things that people have asked about, and doesn't seem to have one simple answer: protecting foam on the outside of the building.
One of our earlier emails suggested ideas for the creation funnel. Well, this is one of them. Make this easier. Why isn't there EPS with some kind of coating on it already that you just simply put on where it shows, right?
Yeah. So I saw, what was he using? We had an article on GBA a few months back about, part of the article was about this topic. Oh, he was using an EPDM membrane.
Over the foam,
and had a really neat way. It was, minimal. We're talking, 8 inches exposed, and he had a really neat way of applying it. And so that
how do you hide that?
So that he didn't hide it. He left it exposed. He felt like that was the most durable. Did
he paint it or no?
I believe he said you could paint it, but he felt that even with the UV degradation, which is what gets at that type of a membrane, that's the only thing that really is going to degrade that membrane is damage, maybe from like a weed whacker or the sun. Mm-hmm. And he felt like even with the solar degradation, it was going to be more durable than other options. It was going to last longer than other options.
I think people would say I'm practical to a fault, right? And I think that's probably the perfect material because it's meant to be in the sun for decades, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that is just impossibly ugly.
That's why I mentioned his application, because he did find a way to make it look tight and neat, and so it was really just a sort of a black surface.
Yeah,
that's cool.
I think it would be a hard sell for a lot of people, though.
I think
Yeah.
it would smell bad. I mean, have you guys ever been up on a rubber roof? It stinks.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah.
I usually put Rob on the spot at this point of the show, Brian, but today it's your turn. Would you like to talk about the podcast we're going to do from the Builder Show? I mean, Rob's been batting 1,000 lately, so.
This is this is a game. I'm going to get points. Can I first mention what our last questioner mentioned about our website?
Oh, sure.
So, and Rob is actually the better person to talk about this, but since I'm on the spot, I'll just mention that what that questioner was referring to is the fact that we are slowly reorganizing our website into what we're calling project guides. So basically, putting all the content under all framing content, all electrical content, all finished carpentry content, concrete, what you name it, all the categories of building into some much more well designed and navigable guides. And so we're taking 40 years of magazine content and 20 years of digital content, and we're really making it easier to find and discover based on what you're working on. And we're already learning from how people are using the site that it's working, because people are finding the stuff that they need to find, and they're spending.
And then they're finding stuff they don't need to find. You know
And
what I mean?
They know to find. Hey, we've never had a great search function on our site. I'm not telling anyone who's used our site something that they don't know. And so this is a way that we're making the site just much easier to use and navigate. And like I said, we know that it's working. So check it out, and we're going to keep going. In a way, we're slowly relaunching the website in a much more useful way. So check out the project guides. And the IBS is coming up, which is the International Builders Show. We're going to have a series of podcasts coming up in early February to cover the International Builders Show, which, like most conferences, will be a virtual event this year. And we'll see how attended a virtual event is versus a live event. The Builder Show draws a lot of people for a lot of reasons. It's not just the product launches and the ability in the education, the ability to talk to network, but it's also the fact that it's a place where the industry comes together, and it's usually at a destination where people like to take vacations, and so there's lots of draw for IBS every year. But we're still gonna cover the virtual event in a pretty significant way. We're gonna have some blog posts on a daily basis about it from Fernando Ruiz, who has been attending IBS for so long that he has really interesting perspective on it. And Patrick has lined up some folks including some of us, to be at the virtual event every day. And we're going to have a podcast every day of the show, just sort of sharing some of the highlights so that people who don't attend the virtual event can kind of learn a little bit, and also just sort of be directed towards what's new and what they might want to go to manufacturers' websites to check out. And so we'll do that over, I think we decided over 5 episodes of the podcast that'll all happen that week.
And we'll be curating good things that are going to be talked about there, and so you don't have to spend hours finding them yourself, which I think is pretty awesome.
Yeah, and if any of our listeners are planning on attending the virtual event, then let us know and send. Like we have feedback on every episode, so send in your what you found interesting at the show to the email address, and we can share that as well.
And to our social media platforms too, right, Rob?
For sure, yeah. In fact, I'll before that day comes, I'll get some better information about how people can communicate with us about that. Because I'll tell you what, you guys, I'm sure, agree with me on this. One of the toughest things about IBS, and I think this is probably going to be the case whether it's virtual or not, is there's just so much going on that you just don't. It's impossible to see everything. And so it would be great to crowdsource to curate the best stuff to see.
Yeah, you're right. It's so easy you can be in someone's booth and miss something great because they have so much on display.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious to see what it's going to look like because I have trouble imagining what a virtual trade show really is. Do you guys have any expectations of what it's going to look like?
No idea.
It's kind of cool, right? Like,
Yeah.
we'll see. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Brian, Rob, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Thanks very much for listening.